Not sure if it's
Hello?
working. Oh, Tom, hi. Hello. We got you on. All right, awesome. Can you
Hey.
hear me?
Sorry. Yeah, I can hear
All right, awesome. Thank you so
you.
much. I saw your email. Hey, listen, it's all fine. It's all good. It worked out. God, I am
Right.
tired. I got my second shot of COVID vaccination yesterday, and I'm starting to feel it. I've been talking for an hour and a half, and it's starting to get to me. But thank you for so much for coming on. Can you please introduce yourself, name, pronouns, and what work you do?
Sure, yeah, and actually I got a COVID test today and it came out as negative, so I'm happy about that.
Nice.
Uh, yeah, thank God. But yeah, my name is Tomas. My pronouns are he, him, and I work as the Florida coordinator for United We Dream,
Mm-hmm.
which is an immigrant rights organization at the national level. We're actually the largest immigrant youth network in the country.
That is absolutely amazing. And thank you so much for taking the time to be able to come on here. I feel like this is a really cool opportunity to be able to educate people about the kind of activism that you do and how people can be able to get involved and do similar activism. It's like a big theme of what we do on here. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
No, no, thank you for having me.
So, can you explain briefly, like, what some of the work that you do entails in the position that you work for, or in the position that you work at?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I'll start a little bit by talking about the organization. So United We Dream, I think it's a really special organization because it was founded and led by directly impacted people,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and or people who have a lived experience by being impacted by like our immigration system, the detention deportation machine.
Mm-hmm.
I myself was formerly undocumented, but a lot of our staff are either DACA recipients or undocumented, or like I said, have been impacted to some degree or another, by these nations' cruel immigration policies. So, in my role, I lead our Florida team.
Okay.
So we focus on primarily, we're a movement building and base building organization. So we focus on organizing youth, immigrant youth, at high schools and colleges
Okay.
to take action, to take control of their lives and empower them.
Mm-hmm.
And we also focus at the local level to push initiatives to sort of cushion the blow of our immigration policies in our communities, and we do this by pushing criminal justice initiatives
Mm-hmm.
uh, that basically cushion the impact that law enforcement interactions have with immigrant communities. So things like civil citations for driving without a license, right? Or giving people a municipal ID because, for example, in Florida, if you're undocumented, you can't get a driver's license, right? So
Mm.
we at least hope that you can get some sort of ID at the county level, right?
Sure.
And then we also work at the state level, to try and push policies at the state level. And right now, we're working at the national level to, pressure the Biden administration to make good on their promises to enact immigration reform.
Mm-hmm.
They've promised a pretty comprehensive bill
Sure.
to give a pathway to citizenship to 11 million undocumented people in this country,
Mm-hmm.
and also to make good on other promises, right? I mean, they signed an executive order claiming that they have a moratorium on deportation, that they won't deport people for the first 100 days of their presidency.
Mm-hmm.
We're now a month into the administration, and we've seen that they've actually deported hundreds of people, including, they just recently deported 20 infants, toddlers to Haiti, a country that's under political turmoil right now. Right now, so yeah, that's just some of the work that we do.
Yeah. That's a lot. Let's go ahead and unpack some of that. That was. Well, I want to come back to that last point later, but I want to start off by talking about like the way that you organize. You said that you help a lot of like young people organize locally. Often when I talk to people about doing local organization, I think that a lot of people hear that and they think, oh yeah, that sounds great and wonderful, but very rarely have like a firm understanding of what to actually do with that. So what kind of things do you actually do with people sort of at like a local level, high school, college? And like, how do you mobilize those people in such a way to be able to make positive impact?
Yeah, so I think at the core of it, in all sorts of organizing, but especially in the immigrant rights world,
Hmm.
storytelling, right?
Oh,
And
interesting.
empowering people to feel comfortable sharing their story and their personal experience is really important for us. And that's a, like I said, to empower the individual within their own personal narrative and story,
Sure.
but also because that's we our I don't know if our theory of change, but part of our theory of change is that we connect with other people
Hmm.
through humanizing our community and ourselves, right? And making human connections. So we believe, and data shows this, that it's a lot more effective to share our stories and connect, like I said, connect on a human level than hit people with a bunch of statistics and data and making arguments that way, right?
Sure.
So it's a lot of just training people on storytelling, on their personal narrative. Um, and then once we get beyond that point is again uh, connecting people, especially in the undocumented community, right? It can be a pretty isolating experience, to
Sure.
live what we call, in the shadows or whatever.
Hmm.
Because you're constantly feeling that if you tell people you're undocumented, people are going to snitch. They're going to report you to ICE. You feel like you don't have a support network to fall back on. You feel like you're at siege all the time. So a lot of what we do is connect people to a community, to a support network. Our organization, for example, does a lot of daca renewal funds, where
Okay.
we give people the funds to renew their daca applications. And then once people feel comfortable with their story, people have tapped into this support community, right? Then we create school chapters.
Hmm.
We create work committees for different campaigns.
Sure.
We plug, for example, if we need to push community, which right now we're pushing community IDs, which I was talking about briefly, have been passed in Alachua County
Hmm.
and Palm Beach County in Florida. We're trying to get them passed in Miami-Dade and Broward. So if we need folks to go speak to a commission meeting, right, and share their stories to commissioners as to why this is important, we train folks to do that. So it really depends on the needs of the campaign. But a lot of what we do is capacity building and
Hmm.
giving people the tools to be able to to organize and to make sure that they are empowered within their own story.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, like just from my own personal experience doing advocacy, right? Often, like I tend to agree to a decent extent that like I do a lot of research with my community on here, and a lot of what we do is like gathering the academic consensus on various issues, and it can be good for doing things like debates on various subjects. People tend to avoid what are called anecdotal experiences because they aren't necessarily indicative of a wider phenomenon. But I think that like what's often overlooked is that like especially if those experiences, if individual experiences can help explain wider data, right? Like, having information on how many people are deported or mistreated by our government can be useful, but it can also be bolstered by people who are actually impacted by those policies and by those administrative decisions to be able to say like how they were impacted personally. A lot of times these kind of issues get like very dehumanized. So no, I completely agree. That sounds like a wonderful form of advocacy, especially in terms of like legislative activism. So
Exactly.
one,
And
yeah,
there's so many advocacy organizations and nonprofit organizations that already do that work, right? That do the sort of like the legal statistics oriented analysis and arguments.
yeah.
That is also important, that there are, like, that is important, but we also need to have organizations that are organizing the grassroots, the people who are directly impacted,
Hmm.
to tell those narratives, to tell those stories of like, you know this is how these policies ruined my life or impacted my family, or and also how like some other policies actually helped me get ahead or helped me go to school, and and how I overcame this, like both the good and the bad. Like we need to hear from people who are actually living through the impact of these policies, and the decision makers and the stakeholders need to hear from those folks as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, like I think about oh, it's always really interesting because like generally I always think back to my family. Like they're white, upper to middle class, they live in the Midwest. They would describe themselves as uh, you know, as like socially progressive but economically conservative. Most of the time that just translates to being more conservative. It's just that they haven't really had any of their beliefs actually like had any degree of force applied against them or put under any degree of scrutiny. But like a good example is the fact that, there was a point in their life where they were very like anti-immigration. They had a lot of very not great political views on those sorts of issues. But then they ended up eventually making a friend with someone who was here initially illegally, right? Or I'm not sure if I want to say illegally, was here was here undocumented, right? And so it took meeting that person and understanding her lived experience, regardless of what they had previously believed. And just after making that personal connection, right? They completely did they did a complete 180 turn, right? And it's really just interesting to me, right? Where you can have people who can seem like they have like such strong convictions and where you can like argue with them day and night about what the data says. But then at the end of the day, all that really is necessary to change their mind on something is just to be able to like form a meaningful relationship with those people,
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's once you connect, at the end of the day, I do think that people are, like human beings are social animals, and they do seek to make connections with other human beings.
Mm-hmm.
I think most people, unless you're like a sociopath or something, are not looking to be vicious against each other, right?
Yeah.
Something that's very alienating about our modern culture is that it's really easy to be vicious to one another online, right? Where behind the computer, or when you don't have that face-to-face interaction. But it's like you said, once once you meet, and our communities are so segregated, are so divided, right? And people are so othered and
Mm-hmm.
fall into like their tribes or whatever you call them.
Sure.
That when you meet another human being that happens to be in another socioeconomic status, or whatever other status, right? And you're just like, oh, this is just another person, and they're a human being like me, and they have feelings and stuff. It's just, I think people are a little taken aback, and even intolerant people, a lot of the times, I've seen it myself. They don't really know how to how to handle those situations, right?
Yeah. Wait, hold on. You're telling me that Trump was wrong and everyone coming over here from Mexico isn't a rapist, murderer, drug peddler, et cetera, et cetera? What? That's crazy. That I would have never, like, obviously I'm being very facetious, but there are a lot
Of
of
course.
people, like I've had someone on the stream before who unironically thought those things and believed them because that's what Trump had said on television, right? Um, and it's very hard to know that there's a lot of people out there who are like that. And this person who I'm alluding to primarily believed those things, not only because of that, but also because they came from an environment that was like more conservative and which didn't have that diversity of experience, right? You didn't have other people who actually lived those experiences to be able to show them like, hey, that's not the case. We're just people like everyone else.
Yeah, I mean, totally. And it's like I said, there's what, like well over 300 million people in this country, and this is, like a melting pot, is multicultural, it's diverse, but at the end of the day, like people live in very segregated communities, and people flock to their own,
Mm-hmm.
our society doesn't do well in terms of incentivizing people um to interact with one another. And I think also like this pandemic, right, has been exacerbated a lot of the most alienating and isolating aspects of our like
Yeah.
modern capitalist culture, like so I think a lot of those problems have been exacerbated through this pandemic, and it's really concerning because at this, I don't want to sound like cheesy or corny or whatever, but at this time in our country's like political process and history, it's when we need to make connections the most, right, and talk to each other the most, and it's quite the opposite, because of like the public health crisis that we're facing.
Oh yeah, no, I completely agree. I was talking to my like earlier before you came on. I was talking about a recent trend that's been happening across the nation of focusing on trans people, particularly trans athletes. And like you can tell that a lot of people, like there are some very bad actors, right? Like there's some people who know that they're spreading misinformation and choose to do so anyway, right? Those people aren't necessarily who I'm talking about, but there are a lot of people who probably agree with those ideas just because they've never met a trans person, you know? Like they've never just like been able to, like their conception of a trans person is just like a big burly man in a dress, you know? Because they are isolated, because we do have a problem with where a lot of people are isolated from each other. And so it's very dangerous when you get into situations where my personal take on a lot of, especially like more conservative reactionary positions in politics, is that a lot of them are probably born out of ignorance. Because like to elaborate on like the trans example, like with me in my hometown, again, largely conservative, homogenous, white, cishet, all that good stuff. I came out, and because I was broadly liked in the hometown, suddenly everyone's like, "Oh, well, all right. I didn't know what that was about, but sure." And then that was it. They literally just getting to know me. Like that was all that it took for a lot of these people to get on board with, trans rights and all that, and broader LGBT rights. And so I don't want to believe that people in this country just are like inherently hateful people. But if we're able to do things like what you're describing, like spreading stories, getting people to get out there and just like, show other people that like, hey, we're human. We're not the crazy straw man, fear-mongered, whatever that other people are saying, then that's a really good way to be able to like get other people to realize, oh, no, these people are not like I thought them to be, and we should in fact advocate for their liberation, and to make sure that they don't experience the oppression that they are experiencing right now.
Yeah, and I also don't, I don't want to sound like this is a silver bullet, right? Like you all of a sudden you tell your story to somebody, and all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, I never thought about it that way, right? Like there's a
Doesn't
lot of
always
people
work.
who are like,
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of people who are like, well, I don't give a shit, you know what I mean? Like, and they're just set in their intolerant ways, and
Yeah.
but it's a work in progress. It's a game of attrition almost, right? Of like trying to sort of push back on the numbers of intolerant people or people who are misled.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, organizing is really slow. It's a slow process. Like for example, in terms of our campaigns, right? Like getting driver's license for undocumented folks in New York City, right? Which is now seen as like a bastion of not only progressive politics, but like socialist politics in the United States. That took 20 years. Like that took 20 years of relentless organizing. Even people like Hillary Clinton, who are now where depending on what your politics are, but for like the mainstream person, they see her as like a very liberal politician. She was very against driver's licenses for undocumented people when she was a senator in New York, right? And that passed, like just recently, like they got that done. And here in Florida, getting in-state tuition for undocumented students, which is basically what that means is that they get to pay at the same rates as Florida residents, because before they had to pay as foreign students, which is 3 to 4 times as much. That took 15 years,
Yeah.
So it just took a long time to not only convince your average person, but then also convincing politicians and advocacy organizations and institutional actors, because something that we also have to name is that it's not just about convincing mainstream people. It's that a lot of the way that policy gets made in this country is through money bags, right? Like special interest groups go to politicians, are like, we're going to give you this donation, or we're going to give you this amount of money, and like that's literally how it is. So it's very hard for advocacy organizations that are just trying to do the right thing or just push policy to actually, get things done without resorting to, what lobbyists do, which is just literally like legally bribe or the
Yeah.
stakeholders and the
Yeah.
makers.
No, I am aware. I am working in politics. I
Yeah.
have been disillusioned about a lot of things. So yeah, no, I mean, I get it. I also want to understand, like, just to comment on the idea that, like, I understand that just telling your personal story to it's not going to be able to reach everyone. Generally, the way that I try to look at those things is like being able to reach the average reasonable person, right? I think that there are a lot of people, like, I know plenty of people, I've debated I've had plenty of people on the show where I, talk to them, I lead them through both my own personal experiences as well as all the evidence I bring up on a given issue. And they will just look at me square in the face and be like, that's all great, but I still disagree with you. Those are people who I am not trying to reach. I figure that what I am hoping on, and this is my desire, this is the thing that gets me up in the morning, is that there are more people who are, at the end of the day, willing to listen and who are open-minded, than there are people who will refuse to, And I think that as long as there are those people, then we are able to do things like what you described, like being able to organize, being able to pass legislation, being able to get to politicians, right? That's sort of like the way that I frame a lot of these issues. But if I actually want to follow up because you mentioned like legislative efforts. I think that legislative efforts are always really interesting to talk about because it can be very hard to conceptualize how to be able to do that from an individual level. So you mentioned a little bit, but could you elaborate a little bit more on like how you engage in legislative advocacy at various levels of government?
Sure. I mean, obviously as you get higher on the legislative body, it gets more complicated, right? Like
Yeah.
pushing legislation at the federal level requires a titanic effort, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and United We Dream, along with a lot of immigrant rights organizations, are pushing the Biden administration right now to follow through on this promise of immigration reform. And they have this immigration proposal that is frankly very progressive, but also very ambitious, considering like there's a lot of conservative Democrats and like Republicans that are not going to go along.
Right.
But that takes years of pushing and overtone window moving and narrative shifting and building grassroots power to make sure that we can challenge people like Senator Hickenlooper, for example, in Colorado, who just got into office and just voted to deny undocumented people from being on the COVID relief bill, right? From getting stimulus checks. Ultimately, failed undocumented folks are going to get those checks, but he voted against it, right? And
Yeah.
just recently he came out and saying that vote was a mistake or whatever. And that's because
Totally.
again, there's grassroots immigrant rights organizations that were like, what the fuck was this about? You know what I mean? Like, we are going to hold you to account. Like, we're not playing around with you. So
Mhm.
that just takes like a massive titanic effort. But at the local, I think where people can have a lot of impact is at the local level, right? So I think,
Mm.
in Miami-Dade and Broward, as I was telling you, we're pushing these municipal IDs, right?
Sure.
And people don't realize how impactful and necessary having identification is for people.
Hmm.
But having even just a municipally recognized ID can be life changing for people. And I'll give you an example from my own life. When I was undocumented and going through the Miami-Dade public school system, my mom was never able to pick me up from school early because she did not have an ID as an undocumented woman and could not prove legally that she was my mom because she didn't have ID. So they were like, we're not surrendering this kid to you. Like, we don't know you, we don't know who you are really. So I could never leave school early, like, ever. So those are this type of obstacles, right, that people face. And like something like community IDs are not just for undocumented immigrants. They could benefit people who are experiencing houselessness, for elderly folks who are having a hard time tracking documents to get a driver's license, for example. Folks in the trans community that are having difficulty changing their names or whatever, and need an ID that reflects their identity and their name, and that's an easier way of doing it. So there's so many populations that could benefit from something like this, but it's really just about I mean it's complicated, but it's about knowing who your local politicians are, knowing where they stand on things. Anybody can request a meeting with an elected official, bringing these issues to them, getting involved in an advocacy or nonprofit or movement building organization in your area that's working on these things. And yeah, just pushing them to do the right thing, right? Like that's how we did it. Organizations don't have a lot of like lobbyists and money that we can go to elected officials and just bribe them to do the right thing. It was just a slow moving process of having conversations, securing sponsors to pass these things, talking with people, with advocates, working with houseless populations, working with advocates, working with the trans community, working with folks who are working with survivors of domestic abuse, and bringing them all together to have conversations with elected officials and being like, this is the right thing to do and would benefit so many people. And then also working with foundations and nonprofit actors that could uh, provide some money to help get this started, right? Because always municipalities, one thing that they'll always say is like, well, we have to allocate money from the budget, and where are we going to get this money? So if you can sort of massage those things, those are always good. But it's really just about bringing people together, and knowing which elected officials you can work with, right? And making a clear cut case as to why this would benefit your community.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Someone in my chat saying this, and this is something I really try to hammer home as much as possible on my channel, because I'm learning a lot more about the electoral process and I'm engaging a lot more with it and trying to get my community to as well. Anyone can request a meeting with their elected representatives. I feel like people often overlook this, but I mean, like, it is a really good way for you to be able to, for anyone to be able to engage in the process of acquiring these kind of rights and for pushing this kind of advocacy in like a super effective way, right? Like just being able to organize with other people in your area who are experiencing the same issues and being able to just like hammer down on your elected official's door, like, hey, listen, this is a problem. We need to be able to do something. Or being able, like you said, networking with other local nonprofits. Local nonprofits, in my experience, are wonderful to be able to work with. Larger, like national nonprofits, it can be a bit harder because they have a lot more on their plate and they're usually focused on like national efforts. But like local chapters or smaller local nonprofits are usually like very eager to get involved in these kinds of advocacy. Kind of like what you're doing down in Florida. And so, yeah, like it's really interesting because there are a lot of tools that people from any background can be able to take advantage of, to be able to push for the type of advocacy like what we're discussing. And I think that's, in my opinion, right? This is just to me, like, I think that's really cool. And probably the main takeaway is that anyone who is watching this stream right now or in the video that goes up in the future, like, you can make a difference. You can go out and do these things. They are not gatekept to anyone, it's just kind of a matter of networking with people and figuring out where to go, I think that's cool.
Yeah, totally. And I think in terms of getting a meeting with elected officials, again, the higher you get in terms of like federal, state, local, the higher you get, the more difficult it is to get
Sure.
face time with an elected official.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, like if they are not responding to you, like protest them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like do a press conference, do a protest, do a sit-in at their office, like uh do a tweet storm, whatever it is. But like like especially at the local level, the more local you get, the more responsive they will be to like negative negative attention.
Yeah.
And like we have a term called bird dogging, which is like go and yell at their faces. Like I went viral last year because I yelled at the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, at a press conference about his COVID response.
Really?
And yeah, and at the end of the day, it's like I think there's a place for dialogue and talking to elected officials and negotiating and pushing.
Mhm.
But if they're non-responsive, and especially if they're doing the wrong thing, then you got to turn the heat on them, right? You got to turn up the heat on them and hold them accountable. And that's really important too. And people, I think a lot of the time sort of like, I guess more cynical people have a side eye, oh, that doesn't have an impact, blah blah blah. But I think it does have an impact, right? I mean, like people get kicked out of office all the time, and whether it's Trump who just got kicked out of office, or or at this federal level or at the state level, but especially at the local level,
Yeah.
a lot of these like city council and county commission races across the country or whatever, they get decided by a couple of hundred votes. Like, and those are the people that are making the day-to-day decisions that affect people's daily lives. And people don't realize how low turnout those sorts of elections are, right? So getting involved in those sorts of races can have a lot of impact.
Yeah. No, and I tend to agree. This is something else that I keep trying to hammer home for people. Is that like I know that a lot of national attention is on federal or federally elected officials because they're the ones that everyone is looking at across the nation. But they do generally they don't generally end up making the majority of decisions politically that end up affecting people's day-to-day lives, right? Like usually that's state elected officials, right? People in your state Congress, delegates and state senators, or like local, local like county elected official people,
Yep.
and it's weird because I don't know. I think that we're starting like as far as like an on like groups online. I'm noticing lately that like basically up until last year, my reading of the political landscape online has been that like a lot of people have assumed that there hasn't been really like that there really isn't enough of a presence online of people who are willing to get involved politically to be able to make a meaningful difference. But I think that we're starting to see a meaningful change there, right? There's been a lot of larger streamers who have gone out and tried to make meaningful political change. Some of those have been more contentious, so we won't get into the specifics. But there's been shown to be like people have been able to take those who are involved politically online and actually translate that into real life political change and effort, right? And I think that's really cool. And so I think that like going forward, it's going to be very important for people to remember that like for people to make the most meaningful change, like everyone is talking about the federal level, but like staying at your state and local level is going to be, where you get your most bang for your buck.
Totally. And yeah, and I guess I just wanted on what you were talking about. Yeah, I've also seen a lot of people stay involved. Even though one of my fears was because I got involved actually in politics during the Obama era
Mm,
in a deep way. And I saw how a lot of Democrats and I guess people I guess in the liberal political ideology denomination
sure.
would make a lot of excuses, right, for a lot of the shitty policies that the Democrats in the Obama administration would push at that time. So
Mm,
one of my concerns about Biden winning, which obviously like I voted for Biden, I organized to defeat Trump, like I
sure.
was incredibly happy. But one of my concerns was like, man, I hope people don't like go to fucking sleep again. And I hope people are just not making excuses
Hmm.
for the inevitably, shitty policies that, the Biden administration will push because all, even if Bernie was president or whatever, like there would have still been shitty things that, that administration would have pushed. It's just
Yeah,
inevitable.
sure.
So, I was just like, I hope that this doesn't happen. And, don't get me wrong. Like we're seeing a lot of that, right? We're seeing a lot of, Democrats and liberals making excuses for a lot of crappy things that are still happening. But at the same time, I at least have seen a lot of people remain engaged. And I've actually seen a lot a lot more young people even get more involved since then, because they're excited about the possibility of actually getting things done now, right? That we have, supposedly a friendlier administration in the White House. So it's been encouraging to see like young people get involved and reach out and being like, how can I help, right? Like, how can I help with immigration reform? How can I help in my community? So it's been very inspiring, I guess.
Yeah. No, it is kind of nice because I mean, like, yes, and mind you, I completely agree. That I do think that there's a wide worry among people that, like, now that Trump has been defeated, that there's a concern that there will be a lot of people who essentially like go to sleep like, oh, everything is fine, everything is great, everything is dandy, when it's really not. Like the problems that existed when Trump was in the White House are still, or like a lot of those are still around today and still require a lot of our effort. And now is the time where we're able to probably do the most activism to be able to push for meaningful solutions to those issues, right? And so
Totally.
I hope that we as a movement are able to broadly recognize that this is a good time to be able to, especially like put people at the head of the charge who know what they're doing and who are able to like push for the best kind of informed solutions to these various issues. Especially like, well, I guess that where I want to take this is like, like people who are in charge of your movement and your organization and just being able to do like my hope is that there are a lot of people who are able to, for example, watch this or who broadly understand that there are these issues that we've discussed that require remedy and that we're able to push for right now, get involved with organizations like yours to try and help push for solutions. So I guess that my last question would probably be like, if like what would you recommend to someone who's watching this right now and does not have a lot of experience doing advocacy, like what we've described? How would you describe them get like as the best ways for them to get involved with helping with your organization and being able to push for meaningful policy reform as it pertains to like immigration and related issues?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I'll speak a little bit more broadly, but I would say just really think about what's important to you, like what's important within your lived experience. What do you want to change around your community, right?
Sure.
And I would say always have an intersectional lens, but
Yeah.
like pick an issue, right? Because you can't fight for everything at the same time. We can do it through an intersectional lens, but pick an issue or a couple of issues that are really, really important to you, right?
Hmm.
And then after that, I would say, you have the internet, you have all this information available to you at the tip of your fingertips. I would say do some research around community organizations in your area
Hmm.
that you can get involved in, right? And like you said, like, there's organizations at the national level, at the state level, at the local level. Again, at the local level, I think it's really important to get involved with, because those are the organizations that can have a lot of impact and have the least amount of bureaucracy and red tape to do things.
Sure.
Our organization is technically national, but we operate a lot at the local level because we have state hubs and chapters.
Sure.
Um, and reach out, right? And figure out when they're having their meetings, reach out to their organizers, reach out on their website, and find a political home, right? Like you can't make meaningful change as an individual. Like the powers that be that we're against are too much. The issues and challenges we face are too great. Together and as a collective, we are stronger, right? So
Hmm.
everybody that wants to enact meaningful change needs a political home. So again, find that organization, reach out to them, get involved. And if you're having too much of a difficult time, getting involved in an organization, they're probably not a good organization, right? Because so find another one.
Mm.
And in terms of United We Dream, I would say the best way is go to unitedwedream.org, and once you get there, you'll see our Migra Watch hotline. You can click on the landing page. There's a learn more thing that you can click and you'll see all our latest resources, all our latest workshops, info sessions. You'll see all of our campaigns. ways to reach out to us. And yeah, just check us out and follow us on social media too. We're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook. So again, if you're interested in immigration, I think United We Dream is a great political home. If you're interested in radical politics around immigration, we're a great home because we don't fuck around. Like, we are nonpartisan. We hold Republicans accountable. We hold Democrats accountable. We want to abolish ICE. We want to dismantle DHS. We want to dismantle our horrible, cruel immigration system, and we want to give all immigrants a pathway to citizenship. Right? We want to make sure that they have permanent protection from this barbaric system. So I think and again, it's led and managed by directly impacted people, which I think is also really, really valuable. The fact that people who have skin in the game and have lived through this are involved in the organization.
Yeah. All right. Well, that is a lot of information. I certainly hope that my audience will take it and run with it. I don't know if you saw, I followed you on Twitter as we were talking, but anyway, no, that is wonderful advice. And yeah, I hope that we're able to help out however much we're able to in our small corner of the internet. So, hey, thank you so much for coming on. I think that this has been a wonderfully educational experience for my audience. It's very rare that we're able to have a lot of conversations with people in these kind of online spaces, with people who are doing like really impactful IRL advocacy and activism. And so I really hope that people who are watching here are able to have a better understanding of how to be able to get involved at the local, state, and federal level, and help make some meaningful change.
Yeah, no, thank you for inviting me and for the conversation. It was fun.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thank
it.
you so much. All right, well, hey, thank you so much, and I'll talk to you later. All right, take care.
All right, take care. Bye bye.
Bye.